Hi students, this video is a lecture on The Birth of Tragedy by Friedrich Nietzsche. Philosophy is a broad and encompassing subject. It is sometimes a bit complicated too because it is about the search for meaning. It is about the search for greater understanding. It is about the search for answers to the questions surrounding our existence, maybe the universe itself. The German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche lived and wrote during the 19th century, but he was more modern than the moderns, and his works are more contemporary and relevant than ever in the new postmodern age. His philosophical ideas have sought to change the world, and his ideas have completely redefined philosophy. He had announced many blatant statements, such as, "Sometimes people don't want to hear the truth because they don't want their illusions destroyed. God is dead, God remains dead, and we have killed him. That which does not kill me makes me stronger." Such statements have inspired people to break from the traditional forms of thinking and look at world from a different perspective. So it is this Nietzsche that we are going to discuss. Who is Friedrich Nietzsche? Friedrich Wilhelm Nietzsche was born on October 15, 1844 in the small German village of Rocken. His family was a descendant of the Lutheran ministers, and his paternal grandfather, Friedrich August Ludwig Nietzsche, was a distinguished Protestant scholar. His father, Karl Ludwig Nietzsche, was a parson, but he died when Nietzsche was just 5 years old. And 6 months later, after the death of his father, his 2-year-old brother, Ludwig Joseph, also died. After their deaths, Nietzsche spent most of his early life in a household consisting of 5 women: his mother, Franziska, his sister, Elizabeth, his grandmother, and 2 aunts. From the ages 14 to 19, Nietzsche prepared for university as a student at the esteemed boarding school of Schulpforta, and during his student years he was well known for his dedication to music and literature. After graduation, he matriculated at the University of Bonn to pursue studies in theology and philology. At the university, he was heavily influenced by his tutor Friedrich Wilhelm Ritschl, and Nietzsche prospered under Ritschl's tutelage. He became the only student ever to publish in Ritschl's journal, the Rhenish Museum. He enrolled in the compulsory military service in October 1867, and there he sustained a serious chest injury while mounting a horse. And because of that, he returned to university in sick leave. While he resumed his studies in 1865, he discovered Arthur Schopenhauer's The World as Will and Representation, a book written in 1818. And in addition to Schopenhauer, Nietzsche also studied F.A. Lang's History of Materialism and Critique of its Present Significance, published in 1866. These two books inspired him greatly. Another important episode in his life was his meeting with the composer Richard Wagner. Wagner like Nietzsche, was a great Schopenhauer enthusiast, and the Wagner Nietzsche relationship had a profound impact on Nietzsche. He noted that the friendship with Wagner was the greatest achievement of his life, and he always reminisced that the days with Wagner were the best in his life. When there was a vacancy for professorship in classical philology at the University of Basel, his tutor Richel recommended Nietzsche for that position. Nietzsche was just 24-year-old at that time. He had also not completed his doctoral thesis nor the additional dissertation required for a German degree. Yet, Ritschl assured the University of Basel that he had never seen anyone like Nietzsche in the 40 years of his teaching and that his talents are limitless. And in 1869, we see that the University of Leipzig conferred the doctorate degree on Nietzsche without examination or without submitting a dissertation, just because of the strength of his published writings. And the University of Basel also appointed him as an extraordinary professor of classical philology. And the next year, he was promoted to professor. And it was while his days in the University of Basel that he published his first book, The Birth of Tragedy, which we will be discussing shortly. It was published in 1872. And in the year 1870, uh, Nietzsche had obtained a leave to serve as a volunteer medical orderly during the Franco German War. He enrolled once again, he volunteered to work in the army. And within a month, uh, while accompanying the wounded soldiers, he contracted dysentery and diphtheria, and which ruined his health permanently. And he returned to Basel in October, but he was always distracted by health issues. And during the period between 1872 and 1879, he published a series of four studies, a critical studies of modern German culture, and the book is titled "The Untimely Meditations." And he dedicated this series to three persons: David Strauss, the historian of religion, then Schopenhauer, and his friend Wagner. But by 1878, we see that Nietzsche broke up with Wagner, and he published a work called Human, All Too Human. And that book marks a turn in style and analysis from his previous methodology. And in this book, he powerfully attacked his former friend and calls him only as an artist. And by 1879, Nietzsche's health was deteriorating terribly, and he had to resign from his university post. And by that time, he was aged 34. And from 1880 until his death in 1889, Nietzsche led the nomadic life of a stateless person. He always moved from his mother's home in Naumburg, and he spent some time with his sisters, and then he traveled to Leipzig, Turin, Geneva, then to Florence, Venice, Rome, etc. He never stayed in one place for more than several months at a time. And while in Rome, he met and fell in love with Lowon Salome, a 21-year-old Russian woman who was studying philosophy and theology in Zurich. She rejected Nietzsche's advances in favor of uh, those of his friend named Paul Ree. Anyway, the relationship did not materialize, and it was during his wandering period that Nietzsche composed his greatest works like Daybreak, The Gay Signs, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Beyond Good and Evil. And in his final year, 1888, he came up with many works: The Case of Wagner, then Twilight of the Ideals, The Antichrist, Nietzsche contra Wagner. And while in Turin in the year 1889, Nietzsche had a breakdown and which left him incapacitated for the rest of his life. He died on August 25, 1900, due to pneumonia and a stroke. While he did not live long enough to witness his fame, and it is in the postmodern age that his works were rediscovered, discussed, and debated. Nietzsche once wrote that some men are born posthumously, and that is certainly true in his case. The history of philosophy, theology, and psychology since the early 20th century is unintelligible without him. We have a host of philosophers like Martin Heidegger, Albert Camus, Jacques Derrida, Michel Foucault, uh, then the theories of existentialism, deconstruction, literary criticism, all these are indebted to Nietzsche. His statement, God is dead, was heavily acknowledged by theologians like Paul Tillich and Althusser. And even when you look at psychologists Adler, Carl Jung, Sigmund Freud, uh, we see a very penetrating understanding of Nietzsche in their works. Like in terms of literature, you have Thomas Mann, Hermann Hesse, John Gardner, Bernard Shaw, William Butler Yeats, Stephen George, all of them were inspired by him. They wrote about him, uh, they quoted him, etc. And Nietzsche's great influence is due not only to his originality but also to the fact that he was one of the German language's most brilliant prose writers. So that is an introduction of the author Friedrich Nietzsche. Now, moving on to the text, The Birth of Tragedy. Nietzsche completed the first text of The Birth of Tragedy in 1871, and then it was titled Greek Cheerfulness. But then the next year, this book was published. That is, in 1872, the book was published. And the full name of the book came to be The Birth of Tragedy Out of the Spirit of Music. It was published in German language. The book was reissued after several years, exactly in 1886. And then the title underwent a change and it came to be The Birth of Tragedy, Hellenism and Pessimism. The book contains a foreword and 25 chapters. The first 15 chapters deal with the nature of Greek tragedy. And Nietzsche brings forth two concepts, the Apollonian and the Dionysian. The last 10 chapters use the Greek model to understand the state of modern culture. Okay? In short, if we structure the book, it can be like the rise, fall, and rebirth of tragedy. Fine? He traces the rise of tragedy in the classical period, the death of tragedy in that same classical period, and then it was dominant for a long time until the 18th and 19th centuries, and after that it got a rebirth. So this is what you find in the text in a nutshell. However, we find a tremendous influence of Schopenhauer and Wagner in this book. In fact, the foreword to The Birth of Tragedy is addressed to the great German composer Richard Wagner. And as we already discussed in the biography, Nietzsche and Wagner were friends. And when Nietzsche wrote The Birth of Tragedy, he dedicated the book to Wagner. He called Wagner his sublime protagonist. And in this book, he gives us significant inputs to improve our understanding of tragedy as an art form. And he takes us to the roots of tragedy with ancient Greeks and their festival of Dionysus, at which the great tragic plays of Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides were performed. He explains of the two contrasting concepts in life. One is called Apollonian and the next is Dionysian. And he tells us that classical Greek tragedy is born out of these two perspectives, the Apollonian and the Dionysian. So first let us see what is this Apollonian and Dionysian perspective. The Apollonian and the Dionysian are philosophical and literary concepts that represent the duality. Okay, it represents a duality, and the duality actually comes up from the figures of god Apollo and god Dionysus. It is taken from Greek mythology, and its popularization is widely attributed to The Birth of Tragedy by Nietzsche. And as per Greek mythology, Apollo and Dionysus are both the sons of Zeus. Apollo is the son of Zeus and Leto. Leto is the mother of Apollo. Zeus is the father. And Dionysus is the son of Zeus and Semele. Apollo was the god of light, reason, harmony, balance, etc., while Dionysus was the god of wine, revelry, creativity, fertility, ecstatic emotion, intoxication, wildness, animalism, etc. So just as they represent concepts, okay? They represent some principles. So as one god stands for order, logic and reason, and the other stands for chaos, madness and drunkenness. But Nietzsche says you need both. So here we see that Nietzsche is framing these two Greek gods as emblems of two fundamental forces of human nature. That is, Apollo represents forces related to order and logic, while Dionysius is related to chaos and irrationality, inspiration, imagination, etc. And this Apollonian and Dionysian dichotomy remains a useful way to view art, psychology, and society. See, we can equate this to real life persons. We all know people who like to impose order on every situation. People who like to be very reasonable, logic, who likes to give precise definitions, who don't like disorder, who don't like chaos. Okay. Similarly, we also know people who throw order to the wind. They follow the impulse. They hate any sort of control. And we consider such people or these kinds of people as nothing more than personality differences. But Nietzsche said that there is an enduring dichotomy inside all of us. These two impulses, the Apollonian and the Dionysian, these two impulses are inside all of us. Okay? And this can be applied to any discipline, to art, to psychology, to ethics, to politics, to society, culture, whatever you take, you can find these two forces operating, the Apollonian and the Dionysian. So that's what he says. These two forces of nature shows up everywhere. So Apollo, the god of the sun, truth, light, and logic, he is the first half. Okay, it is that half that covers everything that is structured. All types of form or structure, you can call it Apollonian. A sculpture, for example, a sculpture. It is the most Apollonian of the arts. It has a structure. It has a form. You take reason. Okay, reason. That is also Apollonian because you need logic. You need an order. You need a structure. Now, the second half is the Dionysian part. Dionysius is the god of wine, he's the god of festivals, madness, that frenzy, that crazy part of you, that creative spirit. For instance, music. Music is a purely Dionysian art form because it appeals to our emotions rather than to our rational mind, rather than to our logic. Drunkenness and madness are Dionysian. Likewise, all forms of enthusiasm and ecstasy are Dionysian. Music, as I told, it's the most Dionysian of the arts. So, what Nietzsche puts forth is that both these concepts, fine, both these perspectives, the Apollonian and the Dionysian, are equally important. Nothing is more, nothing is less. Both are like the flip sides of a coin. When we look at the philosophy of Plato and Neoplatonism, they favored Apollonian values, that means order, logic, rationality, etc., and they degraded or denigrated the Dionysian because it deals with chaos and disorder and emotion, etc. Not only that, Dionysus is also associated with females and the feminine. The reason was that Dionysus, as I told you, is the son of Zeus and the mortal Semele. And his mother Semele died when he was born. And so he was cared by Maenads. Maenads are actually the female followers of Dionysus. It was they who took care of the child, Dionysus. So, as a result, this became the cult of females who devoted themselves to the care and worship of God. And the word Maenad comes from the Greek meaning mad, Greek word meaning mad. And the religious rites of the Maenads were very orgiastic. They are said to have roam around the country and they perform frenzied dances possessed by the God himself. And while they dance, they are in a trance state and they are supposed to have superhuman strength. And these dances or these rites became the origins of tragic drama in ancient Greece. So that is how Dionysian values came to be associated with females and feminine as well. The more sensitive, emotional, physical side perspective. So, when Platonic philosophy upheld Apollonian values and denigrated the Dionysian values, Nietzsche, however, believed that both the forces were present in equal wavelength in Greek tragedy. And a true tragedy could only be produced by the tension between these two conflicts, these two perspectives, the Apollonian and the Dionysian. And he sees that artistic enterprise is inextricably bound with the Apollonian and Dionysian duality. While these two perspectives are always clashing, always destructive, but at the same time, it is the source of creativity, it is the source of procreation, it is the source of well being, it is the source of something, some new ideologies coming up. So Nietzsche primarily believed that one must submit to Dionysian madness in order to attain the state of primordial unity, a state beyond social barriers and narrow thinking. It is actually an enjoyment in one's own existence, a state of being satisfied at oneself, not thinking about anything around, not bothered about anything around, a trance state, a drunken state where you are not bothered about the trials and tribulations around you. In chapter 1 of this text, Nietzsche begins by stating that progression in the field of art is inextricably bound with the Apollonian and Dionysian duality. That is, in ancient times, there was a fierce opposition between Apollo and Dionysus. Both of them are the two art deities of the Greeks. And between the two gods, there exists a wide antithesis or opposition. And we can consider this opposition between these two Greek gods as similar to the perpetual strife that exists between men and women. Okay? So, even though men and women are together in this world, there is a constant strife between these two genders. So, even though there is conflict, there is contrast, there is also creation, procreation, creativity. This strife must be resolved in order to procreate. So, just like that, the Dionysian and Apollonian elements, it is also conflicting and contradicting or contrasting, two opposing forces, but they come together to make the highest art. So Nietzsche says that this strife between the Apollonian and Dionysian values, it is the subject matter of many stories that come out of the history of Greek mythology. And next, he tells us about his intention to investigate the Apollonian and Dionysian tendencies more closely. Okay, so in order to understand it more closely, he associates dreaming with Apollo. Okay, he associates dreaming with Apollo and he associates drunkenness with Dionysus. Drunkenness with Dionysus. Nietzsche thinks that dreams are the most Apollonian state we can experience. Here, by dreams, he means vision. Only a calm mind, a disciplined mind can have visions about the future. Probably it is our intense desires that get manifested through our dreams. Similarly, you can have visions about the future, what should be done, how your life should be. Apollo is a dreamer himself. He is like that human on that on a ship amidst the stormy sea, but he is protected by an illusion. He's calm. He looks over the seas. He brings light. He is an enlightenment thinker. Similarly, you can also equate it with scientific explanation or logic. Okay, that's what we mean by enlightenment. For everything, for every principle, there is an explanation. There can be an explanation. It's like thinking like a philosopher. A philosopher sees things differently from an ordinary person. Similarly, a poet sees things differently. So, that sort of perception is very important in art. The artist transforms reality into a dream. It is something that goes beyond reality. You understand the essence of life. You understand the structure of life. You have a vision. You get enlightened. So this leads to, or this is one major ingredient of art. So that is what Nietzsche means by the Apollonian concept. Next is the Dionysian concept, which is associated with drunkenness. And so the experience of drunkenness is chaotic and formless, unlike the experience of dreaming. Okay, and by dreaming, we, as I told you, it means that vision, that enlightenment version, that is it. So, having a vision needs a discipline, a structure, an organization, an organized form, etc. But drunkenness is not like that. It is chaotic, it is formless, it is disorder, it is emotion. And Nietzsche particularly suggests that folk music is especially Dionysian. So the Dionysian principle stands in opposition to the calmness or the reason associated with the Apollonian. And in this state, you forget yourself. There is a breakdown of barriers when you are drunk. Okay, you become unconscious about everything around you. There are no barriers between man and man. There is no barrier between man and nature. It is a state of divine ecstasy. Man enters into that into that primordial state. All the rules, regulations, restraints, everything is floundered. Man feels free. So Nietzsche considers this duality as the main metaphor for the artistic process. Now, next point is that, as already discussed, we see that he was heavily influenced by the German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer's book, The World as Will and Representation, which was published in 1819. Now, here he refers to Schopenhauer's concept of will. And this concept called will, it refers to a transcendent. Transcendent means something beyond reality. Transcendent, something intangible, force that explains why there is any kind of movement and life in the universe. For example, if I take a book and read it, it is because it is my will to do it. That is, I decided to do it and then I did it. If I want to watch a movie, again, I decided to do it and that's why I'm watching that movie. So, whatever action we do, it is always motivated by some intentions, some desires. We do things that we are interested in as well as something which we are not that interested as well. But something motivates us to do it. There will be an intention, there will be some desire, there will be a genuine interest. And this is a broader concept. For Schopenhauer, the will is not just about humans. It's about the whole of nature. For example, look at a plant that is growing and reaching for the sun. It is growing in the direction of the sunlight. There is something that is causing the plant to move in that direction. Some desire, you can call it, some will, as you can call it. So, in a way, Schopenhauer states that the will is the key to all existence. It is the inner nature of the body. Okay, and he concluded that the inner reality of all material appearances will. You do something, you decide to do something, it's because you have that will to do it. So, in that sense, existence in any form, it is that expression of that insatiable, pervasive will. Okay? There will be many conflicts and suffering, senselessness, futility, but it is this will to live that makes us survive all odds. So, Nietzsche also says that the two systems, that means the Apollonian and the Dionysian, they represent artistic energies. Okay, and these artistic energies burst forth from inner nature herself without the mediation of the human artist. That means it is also the Apollonian as well as the Dionysian instincts. It is also an expression of that will which Schopenhauer discussed. It is there in every one of us, in every living being in nature. And it can either be Apollonian or Dionysian or both. It is a reality. So the artist, through art, he is imitating this reality, or he is expressing that reality, he is representing that reality. Next, Nietzsche looks at, that is in chapter 2, he looks at the development of these art impulses. By art impulses, it means the Apollonian and the Dionysian concepts, those impulses. So he looks at the development of these art impulses in Greek art. Okay, and he begins with a consideration of the Greek festivals celebrating Dionysus. And in these Greek festivals, you see extravagant sexual licentiousness. There is no prohibition, no control, no restrictions on anything. And during these festivals, the very wildest beasts of nature were let loose, and acts of cruelty are condoned in the spirit of celebration. And during these festivals and during these destructive ecstasies, you can also find the presence and the influence of Apollo. During these festivals, there was art exhibited. It can either be in the form of music or tragedies staged in Greek amphitheaters. So, be it plays or music, there is a structure. When it comes to drama, drama has plot, it has characters, it has several acts where the action progresses, dialogues. All this needs an order, right? All this should be correlated and connected in a proper way for a good drama to emerge. Similarly, when it comes to music, even though there is divine ecstasy and lot of dancing and singing happening, there is still a rhythm. Fine, there is a pattern that adds beauty to this music. You cannot simply take a drum and just beat it wildly. There should be some rhythm that should be there in order to be in order for the music to be felt good. So that rhythm, that rhythmic quality, that order, that plot structure, that characters, the dialogue, this is the presence of Apollo. So both these are important when it comes to art. An amalgamation of both these impulses, that is what called is known as the reconciliation between Apollo and Dionysius, which was the most important moment in the history of Greek cult. So we see that even though both of them are conflicting each other, but together they are transforming, or they are evolving into a new whole, and together they become an artistic phenomenon. So this fusion of these two impulses brought great literature, great art. Fine. Similarly, when you take the case of sculpture, it is the artist's imagination, it is his fancy, his desires, his will, which shapes a form, which shapes a human form, or some a tree, or some form of sculpture that he makes. Similarly, in the case of painting as well, the artist's imagination, is creative spirit is at its best. But along with that, he needs to have this order, the use of colors, the use of paintings, the correct proportion of the material that you are using. It may be it clay, the amount of water that is used, the amount of sand that is used, the mixture should be proportionate for the sculpture to be molded into a proper shape. So all this adds to that order element. Fine. So, this is that reconciliation that Nietzsche talks about, the reconciliation of these two art impulses, which brings forth great works of art.